first question again is regarding the success you've had this year with Centuria Industrial REIT, and what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, it's certainly been a very successful year for CIP this year. It's been a result of some very significant leasing and growth in scale that we've seen across the REIT, as well as significant industrial tailwinds we're seeing from both the rise in e-commerce and certainly more onshoring of tenant operations. Across our portfolio specifically, the success we've seen is we've grown the scale of this portfolio from at the beginning of FY21 to the end of FY21, where we're now at $2.9 billion of industrial real estate across 62 assets. Across that year, we added 18 brand new assets to the portfolio, with significant investment in both the cold storage and data center sectors, which we're seeing significant demand and a lack of supply coming through, providing very favourable tailwinds for those two sectors more specifically. We also had a very significant year of leasing. We leased about 22% of the portfolio, or 240,000 square metres of space. All this has resulted in CIP having total occupancy of 97% and a weighted average lease expiry of 9.7 years. Importantly, our portfolio is also underpinned by very, very strong customers, and that's another element of our success, with our top 10 customers including household names like Telstra, Arnott's, Woolworths and Visy.
That's incredible. Yeah, definitely. You've had a very, very busy year. And could you shed some more light for us maybe on your clientele? What sort of sectors are they in?
Absolutely. Our clientele is very well diversified, but we certainly have a skew towards those tenants that are in non-discretionary, food and cold storage related, pharmaceutical and telecommunications. All areas at the moment that have been highly resilient and continue to be highly resilient throughout the current pandemic we're experiencing, but also other financial events we see across the globe. There's certainly a very strong tenant base. CIP currently has about 120 different tenants paying the rent across the portfolio, and the majority of those tenants are either national, multinational or ASX listed companies. So that's over 90% fall in that bracket. So a very, very strong customer base.
That's incredible, and very high occupancy, as you mentioned. Was it 97%?
97%, that's correct.
That's stellar. I've got to congratulate you on that. So we did talk a bit about e-commerce earlier. I'd like to reiterate your opinion as to the continued rise of e-commerce and its effect on the industrial property market.
Absolutely. The pandemic has certainly accelerated what was an existing trend we've seen in the Australian market in the adoption of e-commerce. And we're calling this trend really a shops to sheds trend. So we previously go to the shop to buy something, that product is now coming out of a shed. And that rate of growth we've seen in Australia is at the beginning of the pandemic, online penetration as a proportion of total retail sales was about 9%. That has now grown to 13% of total retail sales being made online. Whilst that's been a massive growth for Australia, we still significantly lag the rest of the globe. The global average for online penetration as a proportion of retail sales is 18%. If you look at other developed nations and our peers in the US and the UK, they're both 26% and over 20% respectively. And then if you look at China, that's sitting at 30% online penetration as a proportion of retail sales. What we calculate is that for every $1 billion of retail sales, you're seeing an additional demand of 100,000 square metres of space in our market. So a significant amount of space demand is coming from those e-commerce users as we see retailers really rethink their strategy around omni-channel, or whether they start to adopt a more online focused element of their business.
That's incredible. And those are some staggering figures, as you mentioned. Do you expect Australia to catch up with its international peers with respect to the e-commerce business?
Absolutely. It's only a matter of time before Australian retailers and even global retailers are set foot on our shores. You've seen the likes of Amazon continuing to make extremely strong headway in Australia. You see our local retailers. A really good example that we've seen through the pandemic is how Woolworths and Coles have continued to invest in their warehouse networks in order to continue to bolster that online shopping. That's certainly one of the biggest sectors, the fresh food and grocery delivery. That's one of the biggest sectors we've seen the take up of e-commerce. And we have Woolworths across our portfolio. They're one of our top 10 tenants. And those sort of businesses we're certainly seeing continuing to take up significantly more space in the industrial sector.
Absolutely. I don't doubt that at all. Those essential services are really key, and they've been, as you said, really resilient through this pandemic. Another effect, though, of the pandemic, as I'm sure you're aware, is the industrial vacancy rates nationwide, which are at record lows at the moment. And they're only continuing because obviously demand is soaring. Do you think this trend is sustainable, this uptrend? Will it continue this way in what's obviously a fairly uncertain economy?
Absolutely. I mean, we think of industrial at the moment in something of a super cycle. And the reason I say that is you have demand coming from a number of different avenues that's continuing to provide a substantial amount of space demand for many years to come. The first of those which we talk about is obviously e-commerce. We're seeing a huge demand from e-commerce users in whether that's expanding their existing operations or establishing new ones. Another trend we've seen with global disruption of supply chains is tenants looking to onshore and upscale their inventory levels. So if you think when you go online to buy a product, you want that product now. And so in order to, I use the joke that, it's hard to live without toilet paper, right? And if you can't find toilet paper at one supermarket, you're going to go to the next one. It's the same online. If you can't find the product you're looking for online, you're going to move to the next retailer. And so what we've certainly seen is people increasing their inventory levels across their businesses, which has meant they've needed to take additional space. Lastly, with the growth of automation across industrial users, we've certainly seen an uptick in manufacturers onshoring or reshoring manufacturing operations here in Australia. As manufacturing, as we've moved from a manufacturing world where it was highly labour intensive to a more automated world, it's becoming more competitive for tenants to occupy manufacturing space in Australia. And those manufacturing tenants still make up about 20 to 30% of our market and our leasing demand.
I can imagine so. And actually, I can imagine that Australia is quite valuable when it comes to that manufacturing land, because we're obviously quite scarce in terms of population, and we have obviously low population density and a lot of spare land. So how is that in terms of the market for international developers?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question around land. We do have a lot of it, but when you think about where these operators want to be, they want to be in infill, urban, last mile environments. So to be on an urban fringe does not have the same benefits to whether it's an e-commerce retailer or a manufacturer, because the biggest cost to any industrial user is transport. And transport represents about 50% of a retailer's or an industrial user's total expense base. And so if you can save them money in transport by being closer to consumers so that they can deliver a speed of delivery, bring them closer to an employment workforce as well, which gives them a greater competitive advantage in winning skilled labour, they will certainly be more inclined to be in these urban infill environments rather than in urban fringe locations. So whilst Australia, yes, has a lot of land, a lot of that development we're going to be seeing in these urban infill locations rather than city fringe.
That's certainly an interesting point. I didn't realize that transport played such a key role for these businesses. But on to another point, which is as the market recovery picks up steam, as we know, it is CIP's appetite for industrial assets has only grown. Do you think this appetite is here to stay?
Yeah, absolutely. We have long held the desire to grow a scalable industrial vehicle, and we only in CIP invest in industrial assets. Today, as I said, the portfolio is now at 67 assets. We've acquired a number of assets so far this financial year worth $3.1 billion and our market capitalisation approaching $2.2 billion. So for us, continuing to build scale is a big part of our strategy, and one that we continue to see very good opportunity in the sector through the continued demand we're seeing from both e-commerce, onshoring, as well as the somewhat resurgence in manufacturing we're seeing within Australia.
Absolutely, I don't doubt that. It seems like you really are on the up and up, so to say. Yeah, we've seen obviously your portfolio expand greatly, diversification, as you did mention earlier. So those are all very good points your way. Now, we're also seeing a massive rise in infrastructure projects nationwide, as anyone can see, anywhere in urban areas and also on more fringe areas. It's a lot of projects out there. And in line with this, CIP has undertaken some projects of your own, obviously, like the $88.8 million Dandenong Industrial Estate. So this development boom, how big of an opportunity is it for you and the portfolio?
Yeah, I think infrastructure is a massive driver of industrial development, and also a major driver of the industrial markets, with new freeways providing greater connectivity to urban areas, with investment in ports and airports around our major capital cities. That certainly provides more efficient movement of goods within our cities. That, of course, provides the opportunity for further development. Our Dandenong development is a great example of one of those infill urban locations where we're using surplus land in order to provide brand new sustainable product. In fact, our development in Dandenong, we're developing to a 5-star Green Star rating. And that's important to be hitting those ESG and sustainability objectives for our unit holders, as well as our corporate responsibility to be providing sustainable and green industrial product across the portfolio. So we see a great advantage for CIP unit holders to engage in development product, to provide modern, sustainable assets that continue to provide that long-term secure income to the vehicle.
Absolutely. I mean, that's completely understandable. And I got to say, it's great to hear that you are so concerned about sustainability, that you're making it a priority. And it obviously reflects in the Green Star rating of your new projects. So that's great to hear, as always. Now, just before you wrap up, could you shed some light for us as to what's on the horizon for CIP? What can we expect to see in the near future?
Absolutely. So the CIP, again, it's going to be delivering on our strategy to provide our unit holders with consistent and reliable income returns and capital growth from a high quality portfolio of industrial assets. You can continue to see us be active participants within the acquisition market, where we find relative value on industrial assets, and you can also continue to see us be a significant player when it comes to releasing our assets and, again, securing that long-term income and that capital growth to our investors.
Right, and as I've seen already that you've had a great start to the 22nd financial year 22, with some great things on the horizon. So we'll definitely keep an eye out on that. We look forward to seeing all your expansion plans and everything you have in the works come to light. So that's just about it. I've got to say thanks for joining us today, Jesse. It's been excellent to hear insights.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me, Holly. Great to chat.
Great to have you on.